Exit Room executives, welcome back to another episode. Jamie Gruber is the managing partner of CF Asset Group, a multifamily real estate investment company. He's an experienced real estate investor and insurance executive and is the host of the Multifamily and More podcast. In this episode, Jamie shares with us the power of setting up an engaging thought leadership platform to generate deal flow.
All right, I'm very excited to have Jamie Gruber on the show. Jamie, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Dion.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And can you tell us a little bit about your professional background and how you got started into real estate?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a 20-year W-2 employee, same company. I've kind of risen through the ranks, moved around with them, and I'm still with them to this day. Good company, great job. All of that's great. I got started in real estate accidentally. It was in 2005. I bought a house to live in when I was living in upstate New York. A few years later, I had an opportunity to move to Boston and did. And a few years later happened to be 2008, which wasn't a great time to sell a house. So I had to keep the house that I had in upstate New York while I moved to Boston and rent it out. And, for probably, 7 or 8 years of that, it was a burden to me. I didn't want it. It was just like, I just want to sell it. I couldn't get rid of it. And that's kind of my mindset with that property. But a few years ago, I reread Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it kind of clicked. I had read it once before in my early 20s, and it made sense, theoretically. But, in my mid 30s, it became like, oh, all right, you know what? I get it. Like, books really do hit you, right? Like, they hit you when you're where you are sometimes. Like that, at that time, I needed that book to kind of understand it. And from there, I decided, all right, that property I have in New York, mentally and financially, let's convert that to an asset. And we did. And we started looking for single family duplexes, that sort of thing. And we bought a couple of duplexes shortly thereafter, and actually just recently finished the BRRRR method, as people call it, on those two duplexes. The realization then was, wow, it took a lot of work to buy 2 properties with 4 total units. What if I just buy one with 10 or 15 or 20, right? So multifamily became kind of my thing. Got educated, joined some masterminds, and ended up buying a 16-unit property about a year ago with some partners. Shortly after that, we found a 22-unit property, back and forth with the owner for a long time, and we're actually closing on that property next month. So that's kind of my path, if you will, in real estate. So the realization, I think, for me was 401k is great, but if one day my company says to me, hey, we want you to do that, and I want to say, I really don't want to do that. I don't have that option if all I'm dependent upon is my paycheck and then one day tapping into my retirement. I wanted to have that option now. So that's where real estate kind of became my thing.
Okay. So let's talk about how you are going about finding some of these deals, because you and I, before we got on the call today, we were talking about, that it's quite challenging to find deals that make sense these days.
Yeah.
So let's kind of hone in and talk about that. So what is it that you are doing, or how are you finding deals like the 16-unit deal that you found, or the you said the 20-unit deal that you're closing on?
Yeah. I would, to sum it up in a word, and we'll expand on this, obviously, the word is networking. As broad a term as that is, and maybe even overused nowadays, that's the word. That is the term that I would use to say how we're finding deals for the most part. So to give you an idea, was it May of 18 is when I decided, all right, multifamily is my path. Joined a group and kind of got some curriculum, learned the whole, like, what is multifamily versus the single family duplex world like, and found a partner at that point, and we started to look for property. So the first step in that, of course, is find a broker. It's always the best way to go about it. And we did. We networked with brokers, had lunch with brokers, all of that good stuff. But in the commercial world, brokers are going to prioritize people they know can close. And at that point, they didn't know if we could close. We were just another tire kicker, essentially, looking for multifamily property, like everyone is nowadays, especially, right? There's a lot of people looking for multifamily. So, look, we did a good job of putting together our criteria, putting together our business plan, giving that to the broker. The brokers were happy with that, because that's more than most people do, right? So we had a good working relationship with brokers, but we couldn't get brokers to send us a deal. We just couldn't. Like, they send us like whatever's already listed on LoopNet, like stuff I could find anyway is what they would essentially send us. So my partner and I were sitting and thinking about, all right, what could we do a little bit differently to kind of get some recognition and maybe try to find some deals and I don't know, lean into some of our strengths. So what we opted to do at that time was start a meetup. So we, at the time, thought, well, there's no multifamily meetups, at least in my market here in Michigan. There were no multifamily meetups. So either it's been tried and failed or no one's done it, but let's give it a shot. So we created the meetup, found an insurance office that we hosted it at. And within 2-3 months of starting it, we had this wonderful couple, Derek and Kelly, come to us with a 16-unit property. And so they brought to us this deal saying, hey, we want to do this deal. It's 2 different 8-unit buildings in one community. The owner has agreed to sell us one of them. We want to buy both. Would you guys want to partner? We got to know them a little bit and opted to do so. So through the power of networking and creating that platform and being sort of the thought leader in that platform, we were able to establish a level of trust with the members of that group. And within a couple of months, had our first deal.
Okay. And so speaking of, networking and starting a thought leadership platform, so how would you go about suggesting people approach this whole process? So you said you started a meetup group in Michigan where you are, right?
Yep,
I'm taking it was offline, right?
What do you mean? It was when you say offline, you mean it was
not like not an online type networking like meeting space, but all offline. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So let's kind of walk through that process. So how do you go about getting that started?
So what I did was, the simple answer on this is I think you have to leverage the social media platforms that are out there, plain and simple, in order to build recognition of you, build recognition of the brand that you are, or any brand that you're trying to create. Like the brand we created is called Multifamily and More. And honestly, the phrase multifamily and more was created because, again, we didn't know if anybody would come to a multifamily only meetup. Mm-hmm. So we gave ourselves the more as kind of an out, like, hey, we could talk about flipping, we could do other things, right? But it ended up being a brilliant term, if I say so myself, because we are able now to focus on multifamily, and most people come for the multifamily. But when we network and engage with them, we're talking about mindset. We're talking about things like Airbnb, which can be related to multifamily, but not quite in that realm, right? So the term was big. So I think social media is huge for developing your brand. Specifically, what we did was started on meetup.com. And what I did was I went through and looked at meetups in my area. And I don't mean like even real estate meetups, but there are stock investing meetups. There are financial get-togethers. There's all these different meetups that are around the same thing, which is trying to invest your money for financial independence, essentially, right? I would go into those groups, often contact the person leading it and say, hey, do you mind if I message your members to let them know about what I'm doing over here? Mm-hmm. And then literally, man, I'd sit in bed. I'd have my phone. I would pop into Meetup and I would go in and copy paste a message that I had, a pre-formatted message with a link to my Meetup page. And then I created a Facebook group, a link to the Facebook group, and just saying, hey, I'm starting this thing. Would love for you to come. And I did that one by one to probably 1,000 people over the course of a couple of weeks. Just copy paste, just do 20, 30, 50 a night, whatever, and then pass out while doing it in order to kind of build an awareness of this thing that we're trying to do, this brand that we're trying to build. And that was a great start. We were able to get those folks from Meetup over into a Facebook group where we could actually network with them more. And that's kind of how we got rolling on it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So how did you go about selecting, topics or deciding what you were going to talk about at the meetups or who was going to speak at the meetups? Like, what was the thought process behind that?
Yeah, it's a great question. We went through fits and starts with this. So what I would say first is just something to keep in mind is I hear a lot like, how am I going to start a meetup? How am I going to start a multifamily meetup? I don't have any multifamily property. Well, me too. But the one thing to keep in mind is I think in the brand building space, what I've learned is authenticity is a currency that is so huge right now. Like there's so much out there of flash and this, that, and the other, and people trying to claim more than they are. Even just saying I've got 1,000 units, like, well, you don't have 1,000 units, right? Like you are controlling 1,000 units, but don't project like you own 1,000 units. I get a little sticky with that stuff. So the authenticity is huge in my opinion. So, man, I'm losing my train of thought here for a second, but the question again was.
Yeah, because we're talking about basically how do you go about deciding the topics, the meeting topics, or the speakers. Yeah.
Thank you. So the first point I want to make is if you're thinking about starting a meetup or doing something and you're not an expert in the space, two things. One, you can find experts and don't tell anybody that you are an expert. Say, hey, I'm new to this. I want to learn just like you. I'm just bringing this together. Here's the expert over here, right? So you can do that. And the other thing is you might be a chapter ahead. Give yourself a little bit of credit. Like for me, I at least educated myself on multifamily, which I learned at that point was, more than 90% of the people that had come. That's not an indictment, but the point is I had something to offer from my education. I couldn't say that I had the experience at that point, but I at least had some education to offer. As far as selecting topics, the first meetup we did was that business plan that I referenced earlier that we gave to brokers. We went through and outlined that. It was sort of an introductory, hey, this is us, this is what we're doing. Here's something you could do. We'll share this with you. You can have it, copy it, do whatever you got to do. We shared that. And as we went along, it was like, all right, what topics do people want to hear? And, capital raising was one. So we'd bring somebody in to talk about that for a minute. There was another, how to analyze a deal. So we muscled through analyzing a deal with people. Like we kind of solicited feedback from people in the group to see what they would want. As we went along, it went from kind of heavy content to pure networking at a restaurant. We moved from the insurance office to a restaurant to try that out. And after a few months, it's like, okay, we can only do this for so long. So we went to a venue. It's actually a country club that I pay $100 a month to be a member of. It's nothing, but I get the event space for free. Right. I don't golf, so I don't pay the golf membership. I literally pay to be a social member, and anybody can look it up. Clubcore.com, CLUBCORP.com. You can look that up, and they have clubs across the country. I don't know what their prices are everywhere, but for me, it was $100 a month. My wife and I get to go enjoy trivia nights and that sort of stuff, and I get the event space for free. We moved it there, and we got to do both networking and the content. The way you choose content in that setting for me is what is your audience and or avatar, right? Like, so my audience was people that are, investing, but not yet in multifamily and are trying to build their team. So at that point, for the first 6 or 8 months, the content I brought up was the speakers I brought up were people that could be a part of your team. It served the members of my group. So we brought in an accountant and he spoke. We brought in a cost segregation engineer. We brought in a property manager. We brought in an insurance broker, right? We literally brought in somebody that could serve every niche of whatever the team is that each of those people needed to build. As we moved along, and some folks are starting to do deals now, some folks are starting to scale up from where they were, their mindset is opening up. We're shifting a little bit away from just, kind of like heavy on the technical content to a mix of market cycle discussions from guests and motivation. Like, I think we're again, reading my group, where they are is generally, hey, we understand the mechanics of investing now, but we just need to kind of stay driven. We need to stay focused, and we need to know what's coming. Like, do we buy now? Where do we buy? So the guests we brought in recently are talking more about that stuff, if that makes sense. So I think you have to kind of meet people where they are in your group and read the organization that you have to determine what kind of content you're going to put out.
Okay. So you said that you had invited different speakers, experts in the beginning, and helping people to kind of essentially get their team, get their team started, right?
Yep.
And then eventually transitioned into kind of discussing kind of like the market aspect, kind of where's the market going. So what kind of turnout was it that you saw, and what kind of feedback were you getting from people that were closing deals?
Yeah. In the beginning, we would get 15-ish, 20-ish people to a meetup, upper give or take, right? So in the 10 to 20 range, say, from the very beginning. And as time has gone on, we're more in that 60 to 80 range that we get each month at our meetup. So, and what's nice about that is we're sort of off the beaten path. Like you mentioned, Metro Detroit is about an hour east. We get a lot of people that drive out. We've had people drive from 2.5 hours away month after month just to come to this meetup. The feedback initially was what drove me to go from content to just networking. Like, hey, you know what, there's not enough networking. Great, let's just do networking, right? Let's try that for a while. And then the feedback was, hey, it'd be nice to have a little bit of content in there. So we blended this together. I think what the feedback I've gotten in the last, say, 4 to 6 months, I really feel like we've hit our stride in that time frame, is that people are getting so much more out of this meetup because it's more a reflection of me. And that's not to say that, you know, they all want to be with me. That sounds like I might have almost said that, but the point is, like, whatever you are, whatever your way of being is, whatever that authenticity, like I mentioned, it should be reflected, in my opinion, in the content you put out, be it on social media or at a meetup. So if you're not somebody that wears a suit, don't wear a suit, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I wear black t-shirts and stuff like that. It's just me. Like, so that's what I do. I like having fun. Like, I don't like I'm not the guy that listens to podcasts on multifamily to get at, like, ooh, this one's about cap rate compression in tertiary markets. Like, you know, I don't want to, I don't want to spend my time there. I want to be motivated. I want to be inspired, and I want to learn, right? I want to do all of it. So the meetup has become a reflection of me in as much as, yes, we have content, we have speakers that are specific to technical topics, but also we did an ugly sweater contest in December, right?
Nice.
We did a book exchange in January, right? Gave away an iPad for the other sweater. We do charity drives. We give a lot of money to charity as a group, right? So that stuff is reflective of me, and the feedback, since I've sort of leaned into and accepted, like, hey, just do you, from my perspective, the feedback has been unbelievable. Like, I'm humbled by it, and sometimes can't believe it. Like, wow, really? You really got something out of that? Like, I delivered that? Like, that's unbelievable. But the moment I decided just to kind of let it be a reflection of me, the feedback has been unbelievable.
Nice. So you mentioned you had touched on kind of the transition into more networking. Is there anything that you would say that you are doing in particular to help facilitate that, besides just providing this platform for people, you know, to network, right? Because and I'm not sure if I'm getting this question across right.
No, I think I get what you're saying.
You get what I'm saying? Yeah, because I'm thinking, like, when I think of networking and a lot of platforms and things, like, I think of a lot of networking events I've attended. Basically, you have the organizer, and they organize, you know, the space and whatnot. They invite everybody, and they're like, okay, great, just go and do your thing, right? And I mean, that's good and all, but what I found with that is the lack of structure, in a sense, kind of doesn't allow for quality networking, if that makes sense. You know,
it does 100%.
Yeah.
And I'll try to touch on that in 2 areas. So, and I will say this, I think that's something that I continue to improve upon, is creating the environment within which to network, as opposed to just like, there's a room, go say hi to people kind of thing, which I think is what you're getting at.
Yeah.
So a couple of things. One is, I mentioned a moment ago, kind of gimmicks at a meetup. So when you come in with an ugly sweater, or when you come in with books to share, that's naturally a way that people are going to kind of gravitate toward one another. So it allows facilitation of a discussion, along with having folks, you know, at every meetup, introduce themselves, talk about what they're doing, you know, mix them up at tables, that sort of thing. I've also done presentations, say, around goal setting, where I force some breakouts so people can actually interact and talk during the presentation and get to know each other a little bit. So those are things that I have done. What I'm planning to do, it's funny you ask, there are some tactics out there I've seen, like the beehive approach, which is essentially you get 5 people into a group at a meetup, and you have a queen. Everybody rotates this. You have a queen who says, I want this. It might be, I'm looking for single family fix and flips in downtown Detroit. That's what I want. And then one member of the 5 is the worker bee, and they go to all the other hives in the group, right? And ask for business cards for anybody interested in what their queen has, right? And then you rotate. So the queen becomes just a member of the group. The worker bee becomes the queen, whatever, right? So you can go around the group, and you know, people are forced now to interact with each other, go out, grab business cards, bring them back to each member of the group. And now you've got a stack of people that you can interact with that are specifically looking for what you're looking for. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Tactics like that. So at the meetup, it's things like that. Like physically, when somebody comes to a meetup, especially if they're introverted, they don't know what to do with their hands. It's a Ricky Bobby thing, right? Like, I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know if you remember that movie reference, but like literally just having a book, something just to anchor themselves helps them feel more comfortable with, one, interacting, and two, it gives them an entry line. Like, hey guys, I brought this book, right? As opposed to feeling like, what do I say? How do I, everyone's thinking about the same thing. Everyone's there with a book, so they can all talk about that book. So those are the sorts of things I do live. If I could, I'll tell you about some things I do more on the Facebook group, if that's cool.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I know you have a platform as well online, and with your podcast as well, as the Facebook group. So yeah, let's definitely talk about that.
Yeah. So in the Facebook group, the number one key is to be active. Facebook favors Facebook group posts. The algorithm loves groups. Groups are popular in Facebook. They want to promote groups. Pages are not as well promoted, I would imagine, because the best way for you to get your page promoted is to pay for that through ads, right? So groups get a lot of reach. So when you're posting in groups, even if you're not the owner of a group and you're posting in groups and adding, valuable content, that stuff's going to get seen in the feed of anybody else that's a member of that group. So I'm very active in the group, and I use things like Facebook Live 3-4 times a week, because again, lives are favored by Facebook, and that will get out there. So it forces some discussion, some interaction online. The second thing is, I do contests. Like we just did this is a multifamily group, right? But we did an intermittent fasting challenge for 3 weeks. So we did, every day was a post. Every day was, people commenting on how they're doing. 2 times a week, I did a live with a health expert who happens to be my wife. And, and we went live and answered questions for people and really kind of forced that interaction a little bit, or got that interaction. So that's another way. The other thing that we do, and it's a benefit not only to the members, but to me to learn, is when you have a group of, our combined groups, we have 12 chapters now nationally, 5,000-6,000 members. My group in Michigan specifically is about 1,700 members. And a lot of them can't make it to the town I live in for a meetup, or they don't even live in the state. So to engage with them, we created something we call a virtual mastermind, which is once a month, we do a podcast at 8 p.m., second Wednesday of the month, through Zoom webinar. It's a podcast style interview where we also take questions from participants on the webinar. That allows us to engage with anybody in the group. And we get, we can only get 100 people on there because Zoom webinar caps it, but we get a couple of 100, 300 registrations every month. People are interested in it. And we had Neil Bawa on this past Wednesday. We've had Rod Cleef. We had Brandon Turner from Bigger Pockets. I mean, we've had some really cool names on there that people can then interact with. And when they see that kind of quality content, they immediately are more gravitated toward the brand, toward the group, toward me, to be honest with you. And I get to learn. I get to interact with more people, and they get to interact with one another in a virtual setting. And then when they meet in person, it just becomes much more comfortable.
Mm-hmm. So it seems as though that you're taking a bit of, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you think I'm describing this wrong, more of a holistic approach, to this. It's not like your focus is not just on real estate investing, per se, when you're interacting with everybody, they're getting other aspects. Like you said, hey, what books are you reading? You can share that with us. And you did the IF, the intermittent fasting type thing, as a means to connect people with each other, but also for you to connect people. And which I'm assuming this is also reflecting you as well.
Exactly.
These are some of your own personal interests. So do you find that doing it that way, it's even more engaging, than, let's say, I'm just going to send out a lot of information about, the real estate market and investing, and these are the deals I'm working on, and so was successful with this and that?
No, I don't think that, only because I think that there are different types of folks who have different types of interest. And if I were a guy who valued the content, the information, here's a deal I analyzed or whatever, if that were what I wanted, and look, you're intermittent fasting, I don't want to deal with that. Mindset books, come on, give me a break. I just want to deal with talking about market conditions and, different factors that are affecting how we buy multifamily, then I would gravitate towards somebody who's authentically putting that content out. Right.
Got it.
But for me, this is me. So I'm
Yeah.
putting this out and it works for me. So you can imagine the people that come to my meetup are not as, are probably not going to be that more data centric, content heavy person. They're going to have more of an interest broadly in personal development, their health, their family, their relationships, but a strong interest in multifamily, which is me, multifamily and real estate in general, being that financial vehicle to achieve all of that stuff. So I can focus on time with my family, so I can focus on, improving what I eat and paying for better foods or whatever the case may be. Right. So that's kind of the avatar for the group that I have. But if somebody is authentically putting content out there that is appealing to people who enjoy that more than looking at me like I'm a clown, which a lot of people probably do, then I can't say that my way is more effective. It serves me and it serves the people that are attracted to what I'm doing.
Yeah. So it just basically really depends on, your audience, basically, like you said, your avatar, and this just so happens to be your avatar. And for you doing it this way, this is like your space, right?
Correct.
Like you
Correct.
feel your most authentic self.
That's it. But I do think there's some things like you have to be consistent with your meetup if you're hosting a meetup, or consistent with the content you're putting out. If you have a podcast or a YouTube channel, if every Tuesday at 5:00 is when something's supposed to come out, it's got to come out. Whether you're like me or you're the opposite of me, that has to happen, right? You have to engage with people when they engage with you. That has to happen regardless of what your content looks like. So there are some tights in order for you to do. I mean, this whole discussion is around finding deals. Like,
That's right.
I get people sending me deals constantly, and brokers now, back to the beginning of the story, brokers now know who I am. I've hosted mixers that people paid to come to under my brand, and brokers were members of that mix. They paid to be there, right? So brokers know who I am and they're sending me deals. I'm able to attract capital. Like, all of that stuff is doable when you're creating a thought leader platform, as long as some of those tights are being met. You're authentic, you're consistent, and you are providing value, right? Those three things have to be. How you do it needs to be, back to the authenticity, needs to be in the way you do it. I don't think that matters as much as those three things. Like, you can't be somebody, I'm not that extroverted type, so I'm just going to kind of post wherever I feel like it, or every so often I'll put a video out. Like, that's not going to work. You got to do it your way, but you got to be consistent.
Yeah. So we're talking about basically, essentially, starting this thought leadership platform as a means of connecting and networking, growing your network. So let's kind of transition and look at the actual conversion aspect. So how do we convert, this essentially an asset that, you've put together? How do we convert this into deals?
Yeah, a couple things. One, keep expanding your network. Two, you got to let people know what you're doing, why you're doing it. So, like, whenever I'm at a meetup, I talk about what I'm looking for. This is what I'm looking for. This is my ask. So I'm very clear on what I'm looking for, but also clear on what I'm able to offer. So, I can be a net worth sponsor for certain deals, right? And I'll put that out there, like, hey, I'm willing to sponsor deals. Hey, we have capital to deploy if you've got a deal that kind of fits within our criteria. So let us know. We'd be happy to talk about partnering up on the GP side and taking down a deal together. So putting yourself out there and letting people know what you're doing and what you can offer to them, to me, is what it is. So this 22 unit deal I talked about that we're closing on next month, we've expanded. My Michigan multifamily and more is now, like I said before, 12 different chapters with, got another probably half dozen coming online soon, across the country, with a local organizer in each one. And I network with those local organizers once a month. We have a leader call. I try to give them valuable content to help them facilitate their groups. One of those leaders is who brought me the 22 unit deal, because of the fact that, I expanded my network. I'm clear with him on what I'm able to offer. I'm actually just signing as a sponsor on that deal, so it's a small percentage of it. He had something that was doable for me, and I had the know, like, and trust factor with him, as he did with me, to do a deal. So I think it's just, you got to continue to expand your network, massage that network. Like, you can't just one call and done with people. I mean, you can't talk to everybody either, but you've got to find that happy medium and just let people know what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. I guess, just to clarify, maybe for some people, as far as letting people know what you're looking for and putting out that message, and it's not really, I don't want to say the sales pitch, but in a sense, maybe we could call it that. Would you say?
Mhm.
Like, so we're putting out that sales pitch, you know, how do we make that pitch, I guess, not come across as being so salesy, if you will?
Yeah, offer value first. So
Okay.
if your first thing when you're going into I always say this, when you go into a meetup or into a networking situation, you have to think, what can I give, not what can I get, right? Like you don't, if you go in with the idea of like, even starting a meetup, if your goal in starting a meetup is, okay, I can get deals. I heard this guy in a podcast say that, so I'm going to start a meetup. Bad way to start. And I'm not saying I sat there like, you know what, all I want to do is give, but I've learned after starting this meetup, and I wanted to create a brand and be recognized. That's what I wanted, so that brokers would bring me deals. But as I went along and as the meetup has grown, I've learned that as I put that down and I pour into the idea of what can I create. People were asking me about syndication. Like, hey, how do we do, like, you know what? How many people want to know about syndication? Great. I'm going to set up a workshop. I had Gino Barbaro jump on and talk through syndication. It was a little surprise for everybody that jumped on. Like, holy crap, Gino Barbaro's here, right? Big multifamily guy. Somebody else the other day had a similar question about, hey, I've got X number of units. I don't know how to convert to a syndication. I immediately put him in touch with somebody that's done exactly that time and time again. They had a half-hour phone call. And so going into it with giving value as much as you possibly can. And even in that one-on-one, you're meeting with somebody and, you know, at some point you're going to explain to them, or you're speaking in front of a group and you're going to explain to them what you're looking for. Give value, give them content, give them connections, give them, you know, names of people that can serve whatever it is they're looking for. Give them advice based on your experience. And at some point, just mention, hey, listen, great networking with you. I just want to let you know, I am looking for X, Y, and Z. If you happen to see anything out there or know of somebody, just let me know. That to me is the way you avoid it. If you just went in, I know I'm getting wordy on this, but I think of Facebook groups. People who come into a Facebook group and immediately spam it with like, this is what I'm looking for, drives me up a friggin' wall. I delete those and often remove the members faster than I can ever imagine, right? So that's what that is. Imagine that mindset going into a networking event, and without saying hi to somebody, just going up like, hey, I got 5% interest rate and no experience necessary. I'll give you $500,000, 0%. It's like, you wouldn't do that. So, you know, go in, add value, and then do your ask.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because even in my Facebook group, we've gotten enough of those, I think, over the past couple of weeks. And I've had to remind my assistant a couple of times, you know, I said, listen, don't approve that. Just delete that. I mean, that's just spammy. You know, he's not providing any value whatsoever. And I said, we don't want that. You know,
Right.
we want a very, you know, authentic, real community where there's, you know, true value being created. You know,
100%.
so yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So what would you say would be a key piece of advice you'd like to give to new people?
Starting out in multifamily?
Absolutely.
I would say, you know, put yourself out there. Like, you know, make sure people, you need to create, in my opinion, you need to create a brand. You need to create some visibility as to what you are doing and why you're doing it, right? So that doesn't mean you have to go start a meetup or start a podcast or whatever the case may be, but you do need to attend networking events consistently. And you do need to go in, as I mentioned earlier, with the mindset of what can I give here versus get. And people say, well, I can't give anything. I'm brand new to this. It's like, that's not true. You know somebody, you have a life experience. And as you talk to people, yes, they're investors, but they're people. They may have relationship issues that they open up to you about. And maybe you have a solution for that or something you've experienced. They may have a connection that would help them, would serve them in some other way. You may have time that you can offer them, or they have a need with their business because they've got 3, 4, 500 units, and you can offer them some sort of time that they need from you to do something within their business. So I would say you need to put yourself out there and build your brand, from either just going to meetups and being known there all the way up to creating a platform of some sort. So that's my advice.
Yeah. And I mean, you've mentioned the one thing you just mentioned as far as when you said that some people may feel that they may not have anything to offer because they don't have multifamily experience. And I think this is maybe the second or third time that you've mentioned that. And every time you say that, I keep remembering Neil Bawa. Actually, it was one of the first podcast interviews I heard of him, and I mean, very, him, and
Yeah.
very successful in multifamily space. He provides tremendous value, to the community. And when he got started off, he had no experience at all in multifamily, if I remember correctly. And but it didn't stop him from setting up his meetup group in that office space that they had, that at the company, the IT company that he was working with. And he was very authentic and upfront with everyone, about that. He just so happened to have a little bit more knowledge in some area, especially when it comes to data and analysis and these things. And that's kind of what he leveraged, and and like you said, he had invited speakers and everyone over. So, for those listeners out there, definitely need to heed that advice. You don't have to have multifamily experience, and there is something, I'm sure, that it is that you can offer. You can provide some sort of value to the community.
Yeah,
Like
I'll
you
give you a
said.
quick.
Okay, go
Oops,
ahead.
sorry. I'll give you a
No,
quick hack
yeah.
on that because I agree with you. I would say if you're sitting here listening and thinking, well, how do I do that? And what am I going to offer? That all sounds great. Write down the things that you are good at, whatever it is. I mean, you mentioned IT. Maybe you're really good with social media marketing or whatever, right? Anything. It doesn't have to be related to you walk dogs. I don't know. Right? Write down everything that you think you could add value to any human being about. Right? Have those written down. And when you go to a meetup, don't ask the question of somebody after you're talking to them, like, hey, if there's any way I can add value, let me know, or how can I add value to you? Because that just puts such a burden on the person that you're asking to think of, like on the spot, like, oh, I don't know, I could use a massage, like, who knows? So I would say consult your list and say, hey, listen, I'm really good with this, this, and this. If there's any way any of those things offer value to you, please let me know. Be happy to help, right? Because you may have an investor that's been doing it a long time that you're networking with, and they're, in their 50s or 60s or 70s, and they want to understand, but they don't understand how to leverage social media or how to build a website or whatever. They may just need a Wix website and it's too complicated, but you've done that. So maybe you can help them build a Wix website as an example, right? So you have value to offer. Figure out what those things are. Don't discriminate on what they are. That's not relevant. That is. Just write them down, know what they are, and when you meet with somebody, offer up that you are really good with this, that, or the other, and see if they can take advantage of that.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Apologies.
No, it's sorry. That's a really good point. Very, very good point, and very good idea. I think, to kind of get people thinking outside of the box.
Yep.
Yeah. So what would you suggest would be some good reading material, maybe a book or something that people should definitely pick up?
Yeah, I'm a mindset guy, as you figured out by now. So I'll give you two quick ones. So the first one, if you want like to really get deep on something, I love Outwitting the Devil, Napoleon Hill. I don't know if you've ever read that or not, but if you've read Think and Grow Rich, which a lot of people have, this to me is like the story before that story. And it was written in the 30s or 20s, whenever he was alive, but wasn't published till the mid 2000s because of the controversy. I mean, if you read it, you're not gonna, in our modern times, you'd have to put yourself in like a 1930s mindset to say, oh, okay, I guess this could be controversial, but it's literally an interview with the devil. Like, it's a back and forth interview. He writes it in that way. It's really fascinating. And he uses it in such a way that the devil is telling him how he creates drifters, like people who drift along. Like, that's the devil's like secret sauce. Like, if he can get people to not lean into their gifts and not reach their potential, the devil wins. And he does it in an interview format. It's really interesting. Outwitting the Devil, Napoleon Hill. If you want a quick read, I love this book by Ed Milet. It's called Max Out, or #Max Out. You'll read it in like an hour, but he just breaks down like 7 quick chapters or so of ways for you to just sort of be your best self. It's a quick motivational book. Outwitting the Devil is a little bit more of a read than Max Out, but either one I think is great.
All right. I'd never heard of that one. Outwitting the Devil. Definitely going to look for that one.
Yeah.
But, definitely, because Think and Grow Rich, that's a really good read there. But I'm surprised I've never heard of that one. How did you hear about that one?
Well known. I forget. Somebody told me about it, and forever I didn't. I keep hearing about it, and I eventually just grabbed it, and I I struggled putting it down. I didn't even listen to it on Audible. I actually read the book, and it was really good. A lot of aha moments, a lot of writing in the margins, that kind of thing as you went through it. And again, an interesting read, just the way it's written. Like, he's asking the devil this and the devil says that, and whatever. But apparently controversial in the 30s if it were published. His wife didn't want him to, and I think Sharon Lecter published it in the 2007 or 8 or 10 or something like that, under his name, under Napoleon Hill's name.
Okay, definitely got to check that one out.
Yeah.
So how could our listeners get in touch with you?
Yeah. So one of two social media areas, anywhere on social media at Multifamily and More. That'll get you our Instagram, youtube.com/multifamily and more, Facebook/multifamily and more, all of that. And the same for the term, the Jamie Gruber. I know it's pretentious, but it's the only one that worked on all platforms. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the Jamie Gruber. You can find me on any of those, and be happy to network with you.
Well, Jamie, thank you so much for joining us today. You definitely shared a lot of valuable information, and I sincerely appreciate your time.
That was great, man. I appreciate it. Hope we can keep up.